Call this special board meeting to order. The first item on the agenda, a little bit of housekeeping, is 2.1 Finance Revision to Resolution 11-07-1584, authorizing use of commercial credit card for teacher certificates. I would accept a motion that the board approves the recommended revision.
Second.
Somebody needs to move. Say so moved.
Oh, so moved. Second.
All right, there we go. We have a motion from Mr. Latchley, a second by Mr. Angel, that the board approves recommended revision to Resolution 11-07-1584, approving the use of the LPSS commercial credit card by the Human Resources Department for obtaining certificates from the Louisiana Department of Education for teachers teaching outside of their fields. Do we have any public comment on the motion on the floor? Do we have any board member comment? Madam Secretary, I'll call for the vote.
Nine for, none against.
Motion passes. The next item on the agenda is going to be candidate interviews for interim superintendent. Prior to the meeting, Mr. Thibodeau and Ms. Strauss-Clare had a coin toss to determine who goes first. Mr. Thibodeau was the winner of the coin toss and selected to go first. Ms. Strauss-Clare is sitting in the HR department right now and is unable to hear any of the questions that will be asked. Mr. Thibodeau will be given a short period for an opening statement and or PowerPoint presentation, and then he will join us at the table in front where each board member will be afforded the opportunity, if they desire, to ask Mr. Thibodeau a question. With that said, Mr. Thibodeau, the floor is yours.
Good evening. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity tonight to apply for an interview for interim superintendent. What I'd like to share with you to begin with is, upon making a decision to serve in the role of interim superintendent, I reflected on my career in Lafayette Parish, which marks 10 years this year, and pulling some of the highlights that I'd like to share with you. I think it's important because what I hope to demonstrate to you tonight is that skill sets that I'm already adept in with regard to managing a rather robust department can be readily moved to the role of interim superintendent. If we look through the presentation, we're looking at 10 years in the parish, a member of the leadership team of 4 superintendents that have served in Lafayette. When I entered this district, I did so as an assistant director. About 2 months after being on board with this district, I was invited by the current superintendent to be a member of his cabinet. I was the only non-director on that cabinet, but I think it speaks to skills, commitment that were seen in me by this superintendent, and it gave me an opportunity to flourish. And I have had that opportunity in Lafayette, so that I'm very thankful. The effective administration of an expansive department is another reason. Fiscal responsibility for approximately $10 million budgets, both general and special fund. Confidentiality, federal and state compliance with time-sensitive timelines, and also accountability. And alternative programs task force leader. If we look at those items, beginning with the superintendent leadership team, one of the first things I did upon entering the district was to visit every school campus within my first 40 days of being in the district. That proved extremely beneficial because it helped me to establish rapport with principals in a way that we could better impact our students in their schools. So I've always maintained a high presence in schools. Another area was interdepartmental collaboration. There were a number of silos established. I did my best to bridge those and was rather successful in doing so. Transportation, there are a lot of issues that will occur during a school day that will eventually bring me into that issue should the student be a child with a disability. Task force leader, one of the other superintendents, a different superintendent of the four described, was looking at assessing programming throughout the district. So what happened was I was asked to be the task force leader for the alternative programs. The first thing I needed to do was build a task force because there was none that was existent. So in doing that, I pulled together a diverse group of professionals within schools, without school, to essentially look at our alternative programming within the district. One of the things that happened with that was after thorough assessment, it was determined that some of the programming where it was actually duplication of other programs, some were not very effective, and it became a matter of changing that. So what occurred was some programs were eliminated, some were collapsed, but there was internal pushback because there were school staff vested in those programs that we were actually looking at eliminating or changing to some extent if it was going to be collapsed. And that was done with some pushback. So I say that to basically illustrate that I am prepared if there is pushback on items that I need to work for, to be an advocate for the students of this parish, to maintain an effective running district. I can do that. I'm poised to do that now. With regard to budgets, I manage a $6.5 million federal budget, $3.5 million general fund budget. I also listed one of the grants that we secured from the State Department, Believe and Include grant, which was an award of $150,000. Now I say these things to show you that I'm pragmatic. I will look at other funding sources if that's what's needed for us to be effective in what we're doing. And then also looking at compliance. All of these things that I share with you have time-sensitive deadlines, also very stringent rules and regulations we must abide by. So those are some of the things that are already part of what I'm looking at doing. Leadership characteristics, I would cite those as vision, as integrity, commitment, service, doing more with less. An example is I am currently in the third year of our department not having an assistant director, which was a crucial part of our department, but understandably with budget constraints, that was a position that needed to be eliminated, wasn't replaced upon retirement. So it took a positive attitude It took encouragement, and it took the ability to convince the remaining staff that we needed to do a structural change, which we did. And we implemented a structural change for our department, but it could not have been done without staff within the department being receptive to what I was asking them to do. So again, I can manage things when things are not that great. We all know we're working with budget constraints as a superintendent, and what I propose to do, borrowing from Covey, leader in me, begin with the end in mind. What I see happening is, I get it. It's a one-year hitch. I'm in. If I can excel, I think that makes me a viable candidate to be more permanent superintendent. If not, I know what I'm signing on for. I'm accessible. I'm available 24/7. I know that's what it takes. A district of this magnitude, it has to have that type commitment, and I'm prepared to give that to you now. That action plan would essentially be turning over the district to whoever would be the 2020 superintendent, with a balanced budget, with an effective program in place, essentially taking this year to stabilize and solidify, not to take on any other new initiatives, just to get better at what we're currently dedicated to doing. Some of those areas within academics are looking at the acquisition of guidebooks, Eureka Math, and basically making sure that we do a good job with those. Another thing that's on the plate for districts this year are UIR and CIR schools, which are urgent intervention required and comprehensive intervention required. We have 15 of those schools in Lafayette. There is help, there is collaboration from the State Department, and I intend to utilize those resources fully to ensure that we're working with our schools. That's essentially what I want to share with you for the opening. I do have the remainder of this same PowerPoint for the conclusion, and I'm ready to take questions now if that's where we're headed.
Thank you, Mr. Thibodeau. Board members, this will be as simple as raising your hand if you would like to ask a question. I'm not going to go around the room or anything like that. If you do not wish to ask a question, do not raise your hand. So, Mr. Latchley, please.
I'm going to be making this question up in my head as I go. I've been asked, throughout the system and throughout my term, as interim superintendent, and maybe an individual who would become the permanent superintendent, what do you see moving forward for our A, B, and C schools? I know we spend a lot of time and a lot of money, a lot of resources on the transformation zone and schools with at-risk children. I don't think a lot of people in this district are aware. Our A, B, and C schools have just as many, some maybe more at-risk students than some of our transformation zone schools. Where would you see this district going moving forward to giving resources to these schools to better help these children? And I'll give you an example. A school the size of Acadiana High, 1,800 students. I'm sure we could easily recognize 400 to 500 kids, maybe more on that campus, that could fit into this category, but they happen to be at a B school. So I hope that question made sense.
Yes, sir, it does. I think what we need to do, and if we're looking at Acadiana High specifically,
Sit up straight like your mama told you.
it's almost on the mic. Essentially, looking at Acadiana High School, since that's the school that you've referenced, the grant, and I do see the need there, The grant that was alluded to earlier in the presentation with regard to the Believe and Include grant, Acadiana High was actually one of the recipients. That was one of the targeted schools that we worked with. The other thing is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think if we're looking at where positive things are happening at these A, B, and C schools with these other subgroups, then we can replicate. We can pull what is being used and where those schools are being successful and try to implement those same strategies at these A, B, and C schools. You touched on the transformation zone. I think what we can do with regard to the transformation zone and looking at it is that's where we need boots on the ground. So we need to have some sort of support, some sort of resources, and I think both behaviorally, academically, and fiscally. And that answer may lay in how do we get teachers who are good teachers to have the incentive and motivation to want to teach in these schools that are in the transformation zone. So you have to have that balance. We cannot remove ourselves from the obligation to students in the transformation zone, but with the A, B, and C schools, we can also look at what I would term low-hanging fruit. I think we could maximize the input that our gifted students have within academic realm. If we make a concerted effort for those students who are in the same schools you're identifying for support, that's an area we can look at. If we can bring stability, because a teacher can't teach until they have effective classroom management, I think it's our job to help teachers do that. I think a model of an alternative program that is not merely punitive, that the only reason you get in is because you were sent there for discipline, but perhaps it's a place where it's a smaller setting, smaller class size, lower pupil-teacher ratio, then those students can be successful there too, no matter what school they're coming from, Acadiana High included.
Ms. Angel.
Thank you. Mr. Thibodeau, as a former teacher, as well as administrator here in Lafayette Parish, I think that you and I can agree that one of the key components of student learning and student success is parental involvement. My question to you is, what do you think you could do, or would you suggest to increase parental involvement in our Lafayette Parish school system?
I think we start by making our schools inviting to parents. And it's not to say that they're not, but it's just to have that emphasis that community resources are an integral part, as you described, of our students' success. It needs to be supported at home. Moreover, where our successes are in school, we need to help generalize those same skills, same practices to the home environment. We have district initiatives currently in place under the title programs to have effective parental involvement. So we have funding. There's a funding source in there. And it's not that I'm trying to raid Latika's budget, but I mean, those things are there, and those are things that we can work with, and she does an excellent job already in doing that. So if we have a concerted effort to make sure that, one, our schools are inviting to parents, as well as their children who are attending there, and then we need to do outreach. There's lots of community support there, I think, that lay untapped, that we essentially need to make sure that we are inviting parents to the table.
Mr. Hidalgo.
Mr. Thibodeau, thank you for being here. So our mission statement, Lafayette Parish School System, is the Lafayette Parish School System, in collaboration with stakeholders, is committed to developing productive citizens prepared to compete in a global community. And I would argue that we cannot do that unless we have good teachers who appreciate and enjoy their job, but most importantly have the opportunity to do their job, and not more than what their job requires, because it already requires enough. So with that, my question is, do you have any ideas? I'm not asking you to create a perfect world, but do you have ideas on how we can find ways to remove burdensome extra work from teachers and students, but focusing on teachers for a minute? Do you have ideas how we can get rid of some of the duplication and some of the redundancy and just some of the things that we may not need, but we have it because we want it because it's a good benchmarking tool or, you know, a data opportunity?
Yes, Mr. Hidalgo. And thank you for citing the mission statement. I was actually part of the committee that developed it with our last accreditation, so it's good to see it in use. Lafayette, like a number of other parishes, is experiencing teacher turnover. Not only are our teachers charged with managing their class, having discipline, and meeting state targets for testing, like you alluded to, but they're finding that perhaps they don't always have the support. I think that's where we actually need to start with HR, with our onboarding process for teachers. Any new teacher coming into the district, I think, needs to have a mentor assigned within the district to work with that teacher to help ensure that, one, they're being productive, and two, we're not in jeopardy of losing them. They're not making many more. I mean, we have to capitalize what we have. I also emphasize a grow your own teacher staff force. An example of that was a number of years ago when we had stimulus funding provided. One of the things I set up within our department was an opportunity for paraeducators to essentially get certified in being a teacher. If you think about that, that's a good approach. This is a seasoned person who's worked with our students, who is vested in the school system, not a first-year teacher internship who may leave after the intern's over. That's where we can capitalize. Once we have these teachers, and if we're looking at answering your question specifically, certainly there are some things that are required of teachers. We have to adhere to state standards and state assessment. I mean, we have no option to do otherwise. But if there are things like you mentioned, other programming, one of the things that will happen in Lafayette next year and all areas throughout the state is the emphasis on Tier 1 curriculum. Tier 1 curriculum is an excellent opportunity to target some of those areas that you may and teachers may see as extraneous. What I would propose to do is, if any school, any administration is looking at bringing in some kind of new product, some kind of new strategy, some sort of new intervention, that it's peer reviewed by the academic team. You know, one, does it meet criteria for Tier 1? Can we implement it as such? I've already, emphasized a stabilize and solidify year for next year. I'm not looking at trying to bring in new things. I think we need to get really good at what we currently have.
Ms. Morrison?
Mr. Thibodeau, now that we have implemented guided reading curriculums in our schools, what are we going to do differently with our transformation zone schools? Also, I want you to talk about Leader in Me versus PBIS, the differences, and what is your take on those two programs? And do you feel that it's a duplication of services and your knowledge of both of these programs?
Yes, ma'am. One, they're not a duplication. The Leader in Me, which I'm a proponent of, even cited it in my overview, is essentially a good place for us to go to start with the creation of young leaders. I've had the opportunity, these events are happening now at my liaison schools. I was at Dussault Elementary this week. I've been to other schools for their Leader in Me programs. And Leader in Me is a viable program. I think at one point this district was looking at creating more lighthouse-type schools. The move lately has not been that direction. And if you look at Leader in Me versus PBIS, PBIS is more of an incentive for appropriate behavior. PBIS is also required by state law. So with PBIS, what's happening is you're looking at external motivators for students to behave appropriately, such as at the end of the year, you can win a bicycle. Whereas Leader in Me, it's more intrinsic. These are internalized skills that children are being provided that will help them to manage, and they're doing it to be effective and to be good at what they do, not essentially as a reward for behaving appropriately. So there is a distinction between the two programs, Ms. Morrison.
Okay. The first part was, now that we have implemented guided reading curriculums in our schools, what are we going to do differently in the transformation zone schools?
I think when we're addressing transformation zone schools, because there's also going to be some overlap, I referenced the urgent intervention required and comprehensive intervention required schools, the 15 schools that we have. A good core of those schools actually are in the transformation zone, okay? So our need to improve those schools is doubly important because we need to do it on two fronts, both to get those schools out of UIR, CIR status, and also to make these students successful, to give them the resources that they need. We're looking at a group that historically has been underserved. So certainly we need to make sure that those supports are put in place. I think with guidance from the State Department, the state has already put out a behavioral, what they call a vendor guide of programming, of how do we address behaviors within these schools to be effective. There'll be part of what we develop in the Super App. The Super App is the federal application that this district is putting together to target our underperforming schools. So that mechanism too will provide supports. There will be training starting with the Teacher Leader Summit in June, and then the training will go throughout the school term for principals of these schools, transformation zone included. For our sake, for our own department, I've actually changed the structure of our program supervisors to create two teams for those UIR and CIR schools, which will cover the transformation zone. We have to have central office and school principals having the same discourse, speaking the same terminology. This training will target principals of those schools and also central office staff. Preparations are already being made for our teams to be embedded with schools to help ensure success. If we truly are looking at a transformation zone transformation, we need to put our money where our mouth is. I think we're top heavy at central office. I think what we need to have are effective teachers in the classroom. I think that's where we target, is in the classroom with motivators for teachers to want to teach in the transformation zone schools. Bring good teaching to the students in those zones.
Do you have another question, Ms. Morrison? No. Ms. Morris?
Mr. Thibodeau, for your past and current leadership positions, describe some of your successes in improving student achievement.
I think the biggest part is in our graduation rate. Statewide, what we're looking at is a graduation rate for students with disabilities that is below their non-disabled peers. It's statewide, it's nationwide. It's not an excuse, it's just the status of where we are. We need to get students with disabilities, since you're referring to my department, engaged in school. We need to have them in their desk. Truancy becomes an issue. There's disengagement. We have students who feel that what is happening in this school is not for them. So probably the biggest success has been an increase in the graduation cohorts for students with disabilities.
Mr. Broussard.
Mr. Thibodeau, we have launched a promotion with Love Our Schools and Transformation Zone. We know there's more than 8 schools that we have in the Transformation Zone that is in dire need of the program that will be put together. What is your plan for getting in and keeping teachers in the Transformation Zone, or what some may call the low-performing schools? There's always a large turnover. You're there for sometimes a year and gone. What is your plan to get teachers in there and have them to stay for the duration? Because the students are discouraged because, some of the teachers don't last a year. They go there the next year looking forward to Miss So-and-so, Mr. So-and-so, and they're gone. So it's discouraging to the student to see the large turnover, let alone the school itself.
I think we start with what I described as our grow our own teacher corps. Some of those same schools that you're describing have paraeducators in those classrooms who work hand in hand with those students daily. You also have a group of teachers who currently may not have the certifications needed in order to be as effective as they could be. Due to teacher shortages, which we're experiencing with math, science, and special education, those need to be our focus areas. Math and science is important. We have to have that as part of what our students are leaving with. This goes back to Mr. Hidalgo's question about how do we help ensure that all of our students, Transformation Zone students included, can compete globally. That's how. Look at the success we've had with STEM. STEM has been one of the jewels of this parish. Between STEM, the other is ECA. And granted, we can't have ECA for every student, but we could have STEM. We could expand what we're doing with STEM. There's an element of STEM that brings in the arts, STEAM. I think those are avenues that we can also pursue. If we're looking at doing that diligently and we're supporting our teachers and we give the teachers the bolstering that they need, you won't see that turnover. You won't see that burnout. Moreover, if we take some of our more established teachers who have proven results in what they're doing, why not give the incentive for those teachers to be in these transformation zones? Put together some sort of package that will attract students, teachers to those students.
Mr. Knezik.
Mr. Thibodeau, you mentioned that, I don't want to mischaracterize what you said, but I believe you said that you believe that we're a little top-heavy in central office, and I understand. I've heard that before. We've been through enough budgets, and we've been through enough budget cycles to where we've heard, cut central office, but, this board, I find, has been very effective at trimming, and I find that our superintendent has been very effective at trimming. So I'm interested in where you feel we are top-heavy with some specificity so that we can redirect those funds back into the Transformation Zone schools.
Certainly. I think Dr. Eckerlard has been very successful. I think the board has supported him in making those cuts. I'm living proof, 3 years without an assistant director from central office staff. Let me be quite specific. When I'm not talking globally for central office, I'm talking specifically for what we've devised as our transformation zone. We have a number of staff that we've brought in specifically to work with the transformation zone. I think what initially started as one individual is now at least 3. And I think if we want to get more bang for our buck, we try to divert those type funds for teachers to work in the transformation zone.
Thank you.
And Mr. Thibodeau, Dr. Chasson has indicated that he does not want to ask any questions, so I will ask you the final one from the board. One of the things that I'm passionate about is figuring out a way to have effective principals have more control over their campuses. For instance, schools within just a couple miles of each other, Myrtle Place, S.J. Montgomery, and Woodvale, could not be more different as far as the culture and the character of the school. Lafayette High is its own beast, as we all know. So, in the context of these very particular examples that I'm about to give you, I'd like to hear your philosophy for delegating control over policies, or how you can allow schools to implement their own policies on their own campuses that best fit their students, especially in the case where you have highly effective principals and highly effective teachers. So just a caveat, I'm a sucker. The gifted kids at Lafayette High, anytime they tell me to say something, I say it. So these questions are from them, but it folds into a philosophy that I'd really like to hear about from you. How do you feel about changing the cell phone policy to allow high school students to have cell phones before school, between classes, and at lunch? Would you be willing to pilot a program where one school essentially had a different policy than the other schools? And also, how do you feel about changing the school start times so high school students can go to school after 8 a.m.? I'm telling you, I say what they tell me to say.
Certainly. I think when we were looking at cell phone policy, just for the reasons that you described, this district has looked at previously one-to-one devices. Students being able to utilize their personal device as part of the technology that they use in the class. I would support that. I think that's a good way to go. If you're looking at the distinctions you made between the three schools you referenced, different school culture, different school climate even, we can look at site-based management, at principals actually of those schools having the autonomy, not a free-for-all, but autonomy to basically implement and devise programming with their staff that's central to their school. I don't see any issue with that. I think it would have probably really positive byproducts, maybe even keeping some of the teachers Mr. Broussard is saying we're losing. I think that would be very beneficial, and I would certainly be receptive to site management of principals for their schools. With regard to the start of school time, I know that's been visited a lot, even before now. Even in my experience in another district, when we were looking at that issue, the elephant in the room was transportation. How do we manage, I think particularly with Lafayette, geographically small, but we're all over. We're from every end of the parish. How do we reconcile a schedule that enables transportation to ensure that we're getting students to and from school in a timely manner? That's where I think the rub is.
Don't worry, that was a trick question. There is no answer to it. No, I kid. I think there are a lot of people out there that think a lot long and hard about it and haven't been able to come up with the right answer yet. So, Dr. Chasson, have you changed your mind? All right. Mr. Thibodeau, the floor is yours for your closing statement.
All right, thank you. What I've attempted to demonstrate to the board tonight, to the public, and to everyone here, is during the past 10 years, I've had an opportunity to flourish in Lafayette. I've experienced tremendous growth, and the skill sets needed to manage a district I've already cultivated as a director, and I have for some time. I have done this when encountering hardship, a shortage of staff. I've had a number of positions that have not been replaced. I had two options. I could complain and gripe, or I could try to get proactive and say, how do we make this work? I can't make anything work by myself. Everything has to be collaborative. I need stakeholder input. I need to work with stakeholders. I need to make sure that I'm guiding this district in the right direction. Essentially, you're giving me a one-year lease. So that enables me to make sure that what is currently in place, the direction Dr. Aguilar has poised this district, to ensure that that's where we go. And when we turn over the keys to the superintendent in 2020, that everything is in place. We've started this school year in the fall smoothly. We're picking students up. We're getting them back home timely. We're feeding them. We're making sure that everything is set in place to go. Moreover, we have to ensure a safe environment. Parents send their children to us with the presumption that their children are safe throughout the school day. Safe and orderly, you'll see it addressed in the PowerPoint that I left with you. That's a continuation of existing partnerships. It's also looking at an expansion of CPI training, of de-escalation of student behavior, of a model of a alternative school that is not merely punitive, but can also be a place where a student may actually graduate, who could be there with the supports in place and be successful. A number of our students, for disciplinary reasons, prosper in a small class setting. There's more individual attention to these students. So I get the task. The task is run the district for a year, make sure that everything is kept orderly and in place, and then the board of 2020 will actually have their superintendent of choice in place. All I'm asking you is for the opportunity to be that person. I've committed 10 years of my career to this district. This district has been very good to me. It's changed me exponentially. Just the size, just the magnitude of what I do on a daily basis, of not knowing when the local media is going to be outside your door. I mean, you know, we live in a microscope, so certainly I get all of that. I know what it'll take, and I can do it, and I can be an effective interim superintendent for your school system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thibodeau. No. That's fine if y'all want to clap. We will take a 5-minute break, and I will retrieve Ms. Trosclair and put Mr. Thibodeau in the soundproof tank. Although I guess it doesn't really matter at this point, does it? Mr. Hidalgo. Welcome, Ms. Strasclair. You will have 5 minutes for a opening presentation, opening statement, and then you will sit at the table right there. Each board member will have the opportunity, if so desired, to ask you a question about your plans and ability to be the interim superintendent, and then you'll be given 5 minutes at the end for a closing statement. So with that said, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Centeni. I am Irma Trosclair, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum Instruction in the Lafayette Parish School System. It is definitely an honor to be here this evening interviewing for the interim superintendent position, so I thank the board for this opportunity. I have 35 years in the field of education. 18 of those years I spent in the classroom as a classroom teacher. I have experience teaching ELA and math in grades 1 through 12. After teaching for 18 years, I moved into leadership. I have served as a building level administrator in 3 schools in 3 different districts. 2 of those schools became national blue ribbon schools in 2 different categories. I'm happy to see some of our Eunice Elementary staff and some of our South Crowley folks here today. But Eunice Elementary became a national blue ribbon school because of the work that we did in reaching and maintaining a school performance score of 100 or higher for 5 consecutive years. The second school in Acadia Parish, South Crowley, became a blue ribbon school because of the work that we did there of significantly closing achievement gaps for students. I moved into Lafayette Parish. I've been here for about 3.5 years. I've worn different professional hats. One of those hats was acting principal at Alice Boucher for about 1.5 years, and the work that we did there moved that school to a C for the first time in school history. My original work in this district was with 3 elementary schools, Alice Boucher, J.W. Falk, and Karen Crow Heights. I currently work with our academic team in providing services and support for all the schools in our district in helping impact student achievement. Throughout my career, I've often been asked if I feel that my success and the success of our hardworking teams is because of the fact that I believe all children can learn. I definitely believe all children can learn. I've seen it happen time and time again in various schools, in various districts. But that is not what makes us successful. That statement on its own does nothing for students. What does something for students is when we look at each individual child on a campus, or we look at particular subgroups of children on campuses across our district, and we add to that the question, if all students can learn, then why aren't they? And so when we look strategically at students who are not growing, and we ask questions why, and we let data tell us the story, because data tells us the story of each boy and girl. It tells us the story of groups of students. And when we make it our business, as we should, make it our business to really dive into that data and come up with solutions, that's when things change for children. So I thank you again for this opportunity this evening and look forward to chatting with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Trosclair. You can have a seat right there in front of the microphone. Board members, same as before. It's as simple as raising your hand if you would like to ask Ms. Trosclair a question. We'll start with Mr. Latchley once again.
Ms. Trosclair, I'm going to try to word this question the exact same way I did for Mr. Thibodeau. I realize the effort that is put forth for the transformation zone and you know, the at-risk children and so forth and so on. Something I've been asked the majority of my time on the school board is, when and what are we ever going to do for these same type of children who happen to be at an A, B, or C school? I use the Acadiana, which I always do, as a reference. A school of 1,800 students that probably has 400, 500, 600 kids that fall into this category, but they happen to be at a B school and may not get some of the same resources that the children in Transformation Zone gets. such as, you know, the lower class sizes and so forth and so on. What do you see being able to be done to help these students at these other schools that don't fall within the transformation zone?
I see many things that can be done, and as a matter of fact, as this school year in particular, I offered to leaders at a principals meeting, we had a pocket of money that was sitting there and not being used, and it was designated for student remediation. We have vulnerable students in every school in this district, and there are different types of vulnerable students, and I'll speak to that in just a bit. But what we did was, with that money, I told principals, if you have a need at your school, and it may be that your need is that you have high-performing students at your school that you still want and should push to another level. So we have schools all across the district. We have Myrtle Place, Broadmoor, just to name a few, that we've provided tutors as well to help those schools that aren't in transformation. A vulnerable student is any student that we have created opportunity gaps for. Quite often, before there are achievement gaps, there are opportunity gaps. And what I mean by that is when we don't expose children in any school at any performance level to rigorous instruction, to aligned instruction, to high quality curriculum and high quality teaching, that student is vulnerable. So we think of transformation as being the only place that there are vulnerable students. That's not the case. If I have a high performing student at my school and that student needs to push to the next level, then I need to provide opportunities for that. But again, we've provided tutors. Schools need to identify those students. The adoption of a Tier 1 ELA curriculum and building a strong literacy plan is important for our district. We have 34% of our third graders that are reading below level at the end of third grade currently. Third grade is a major predictor for students and the chance that they have of graduating from high school. So we pour resources into all of those schools. I've made that part of what I've worked with our high-performing schools to do. Yes, building a strong literacy plan and offering opportunities to students at every level, and providing high-quality PD to teachers all over our district that service all of our children.
Would anyone else like to ask a question? Ms. Donjo.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Ms. Trusclair, as a former teacher here in Lafayette Parish, as well as an administrator, please don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that I was teaching at the same time you were teaching.
It might be close.
It was before your time. But I think that we can both agree that one of the key components in our students' education is parental involvement. Having said that, my question to you is, what do you think you can do or we can do as a system to increase parental involvement? Thank you.
I think that we need to be as transparent as we can with our parents. I think we need to communicate, have a strategic plan for communication. I see a district, I think it's Ascension Parish, where that superintendent has done an outstanding job with, it's called Chats with the Superintendent. It's an electronic platform that goes out. He videotapes messages that he needs going out to parents and to the community as a whole in front of initiatives, in front of things happening, to give folks an opportunity to understand why sometimes we do things or how our school performance scores work. I've already met, I had the pleasure of meeting with Lafayette Parents for Education, Ms. Heather Blanchard, and those folks who truly simply want to work with us and partner with us in the work that we do. I plan on and have reached out to them to be part of our advisory board that we have for the Transformation Zone, as well as to help us move forward in that type of communication. I will say that parental involvement definitely makes a difference and makes our job somewhat easier. But I've always been one to say that even without parental involvement, we still have a job to do. That in spite of parents not being involved, that doesn't take away the responsibility that we have. But I think through setting up a systematic internal and external communication plan, and in front of you you have a pamphlet, and on the left side of that pamphlet when you open it up, it does have a plan for communication to bring parents in and help be more transparent with the things that we do and the reasons that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Angel. Ms. Morris?
Ms. Trosclair, for your past and current leadership positions, describe some of your greatest successes in improving student achievement.
My greatest success in school turnaround, and I've had great success in turning schools around. I say I should say we, because I have some folks back here who worked right alongside me and just as hard in those schools, that with 3 schools, because I have Alice Boucher here as well. The greatest success that I've had as a leader is empowering the people who are doing the real work. And the people doing the real work are the teachers in the classrooms. They are the ones that are in the trenches, and they are the ones that make the magic happen. So my role as a leader has been to also identify their needs as a staff and provide the support. We've made great gains by simply identifying weaknesses, honing in on those, and having a plan for those. Empowering teachers who empower students is my greatest accomplishment.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Ms. Morrison?
Ms. Troxclair, some would say that Leader in Me and PBIS is a duplication of services. What is your take on these 2 programs, and do you see any duplications in these 2 services for our students?
PBIS is unique to schools. It's what they make it. Leader in Me is a little bit different, that it follows a particular format. So I don't see duplication in services between those 2. The way that I did PBIS at Eunice Elementary was completely different than perhaps the way a neighboring elementary school did PBIS. So no, I don't see that those duplicate services whatsoever.
How do you feel about Leader in Me, as a professional and all of your experience that you have? Can you speak on that a little bit more?
Certainly. So particular programs match particular needs at particular schools. With any program that you're bringing on any campus, that school has to be ready. One of the pillars of Leader in Me is first things first. So we have schools that have been very successful with Leader in Me. We have schools that aren't quite ready for that, because of the teacher turnover at those schools. So the Leader in Me program is a program that needs to be sustained, and when a school has turnover rates that some of our schools have, we would always be starting over with those staff. So I've seen Leader in Me as well as other programs be good for schools that are ready for that. We, in the 3 emerging schools a couple years ago, did capturing kids' hearts as opposed to Leader in Me at that time, which was what that school needed, those schools needed at that time for where we were. But I think that any program that you bring that matches the needs of a school is a good program.
Mr. Hidalgo?
Ms. Trosclair, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Hidalgo.
The Lafayette Parish School System's mission statement reads, "The Lafayette Parish School System, in collaboration with stakeholders, is committed to developing productive citizens prepared to compete in a global community." And I believe we could argue that unless we have good, dedicated teachers who have the opportunity to do their job, we can't accomplish that goal. We can't achieve that mission. And so what I would like to know is, I'm not asking you to create a perfect world here, but I would like to know what are some things you can do? What can we do as a system to remove some of that burdensome extra work off of teachers and students, but focusing just on teachers in this conversation? I understand that we have a lot of things that are mandated, and it's great. We talk about those things, but we put a lot of extra stuff on teachers. And I think we have good reasons or excuses that we do it, benchmarking and et cetera. But I think it's affecting what's happening in the classroom, and I'd like to know your take on getting rid of some of that.
I think we have to be very strategic in making sure that anything outside of instruction that ends up on a teacher's plate is something that absolutely needs to be there. The teachers that are seated behind me that were teachers in the schools that I led in the past, and I hope they nod their heads to this, but I feel wholeheartedly that they will. As a leader, I did everything that I could to remove any non-instructional tasks off of their plates so that they could get down to the business of teaching and learning. So when we pile additional duties on teachers, and there are some things that absolutely teachers have to do, but when we pile unnecessary non-instructional tasks on teachers, they're going to work to get that done. They go home to families, they have other obligations, so if we're not really careful and strategic in an effort to get those things done, they're going to do it when we really need them to be teaching in the classroom. My folks that I work with on the academic team at the district, our specialists, could attest to the fact that my message since I've been in this current role has been, how can we streamline things for leaders and for teachers? I see as an area for growth for our district that our departments need to come together and collaborate. I feel that we're working in isolation sometime across our central office, departments working in silos instead of coming together and streamlining our efforts and our goals and our work. That type of approach to things trickles down to the classroom. One example is the fact that I brought early on this year 504 folks and our special education folks. What was happening was 504 had tasks and duties and things that schools needed to do. SPED had different ones, all with the same end result. So those two teams came together and are in the process of streamlining everything so that we can take things off of teachers' plates.
And I'd like to ask a follow-up, and this question is based on many, many emails that I've received over the past weeks and arguably months. I'd like to preface my question by saying that, first of all, it's been a pleasure to work with you since you've been here in the district. And I've never heard anything bad about you, so I'm proud of that for you. And I've also like to preface it with, I've been worked in the business world for many years now, and I know that sometimes you got to make tough decisions.
Exactly.
And you have to do things that may not be comfortable. But I feel obligated to ask you this question. It has been suggested quite a bit through email. Again, not about you directly, but about some of the staff that work for you, that they may not be easy to work for, easy to work with. And I think this district, among many districts, have seen their fair share of fear and intimidation in leadership. And I don't believe there's a place for that, personally. And so I would like to ask you to respond to that and give any feedback on any kind of gesture or promises you can make to the good people that work at the Lafayette Parish School System on exactly what they can expect out of your leadership and trickle down from your leadership.
They can expect from my leadership, Mr. Hidalgo, the exact same things that I've exhibited in all of my leadership positions. And I do know what you're referring to. We've had pushback from the transformation zone. Change is hard. Change is radical. I will tell you that the schools that are labeled as CIR, Comprehensive Intervention Required by the state, we started out with 7. Going into next school year, we actually have 3 schools who've showed enough significant progress that that label is removed from them. Alice Boucher Elementary, Karen Crow Heights, and Karen Crow High School. Because of the progress that we've made with student achievement, those schools will no longer be labeled CIR. So that's what's supposed to happen. That's the goal. I have data for the last 10 years in all 7 of those transformation schools. And for the last 10 years, none of those schools, with the exception of last year and the year before when Northside moved to a C, ever scored above a D or an F. And when I think about the number of students impacted by that, it's great concern. So change has to happen. the status quo has not worked for children. We have definitely an urgent need to make things better. This has been a year of struggle in the zone for many reasons, because change is hard. So sometimes, we certainly don't want to stress teachers beyond the normal stress of a job. Teaching is stressful. But what's also very stressful are children who can't earn a high school diploma. So when children can't earn a high school diploma, they're stressed for the rest of their life. So unfortunately, when money was released for redesign, it was late July. In teachers' defense, they were at a great disadvantage because they got new curriculum mandated. We needed new curriculum. We needed Tier 1 curriculum. All students should have access to good, high-quality teaching and learning. But they actually received that material right as school was starting. So here you go. Welcome back to school. Here's new material that we are mandated to use. So there's been a lot of struggle. Year 2 in transformation, we're looking to be much better because we're putting nothing new on the plates of teachers in transformation next year. They're actually in year 2. I don't condone fear and intimidation of any sort, but the needs there are great. And certainly if you ever hear that those things are happening with anyone on my staff, I need to know that. However, we will have pushback, but status quo has not worked for kids. And that's the main thing in our business, is student achievement. We need to provide as much support to our teachers so they can provide support to our students. But under my leadership, I definitely do not condone fear and intimidation as a tactic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hidalgo. Ms. Broussard.
Good evening to you, Ms. Starsclair.
Good evening, Mr. Broussard.
Try to remember exactly how I asked the question to Mr. Thibodeau, but I think in the 8 schools that we have launched the Love for Your School and Transformation Zone, we know there's more than 8 schools who need to be in the Transformation Zone. But one of the problems I've got in my district, and been having it long before I sat in this chair, is that I've seen some teachers don't last a week. Some last a year. It's frustrating to students when Mr. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so is not returning for the next year. They feel rejected, they feel left out. We need to, as many would, I would believe every teacher is a qualified teacher, but we need to hire and retain teachers in our schools for years and not allow them to be, the schools to be stepping stone to the next greater career. I understand we are in the pursuit of something better, but it's frustrating to students to see that, to know they're only here for a little while until they move on to a better climate, let's say. What are your plans to hire what we call qualified teachers and retaining teachers to our transformation zone schools?
So, Mr. Elroy, I don't actually need to speak to what are my plans, because we are currently doing some things in transformation zone relative to recruiting and relative to retention. Research shows us that the best way to keep a teacher is to offer high levels of support. Currently in our district, we have no formal mentorship program for teachers, and districts across the state that have strong induction and mentorship ongoing all year, mentorship programs for new teachers and for struggling teachers have greater rates of retention. In the transformation zone, and it was a goal of mine since I came to Lafayette Parish this year through partnerships with the Schumacher Group and with the Pews and with Mr. Matt Stuller, who have been very generous in their collaboration and work with us. We were able to launch what we call the AIM Academy. That is an acronym for Achievement in Mind. We have contracted out with Ms. Annette Bro, who once a month comes, and new teachers with under 3 years experience in the transformation zone, are paid stipends once a month to come and get PD through that program, we have had really good feedback and great participation from teachers in the transformation zone. We focus that PD on the needs of struggling teachers. New teachers in any school, one of the common struggles is classroom management. So this year, Ms. Annette Bro has been coming to the AIM Academy once a month and providing PD and connecting with teachers. That's a big piece. I've already spoken to HR to launch something of that nature district-wide, because we have struggling teachers everywhere. With the purchase of Frontline that you all approved just a couple board meetings ago, or last board meeting actually, what we hope to accomplish with Frontline coming in is that we are able, number one, to reduce overtime in HR, but also to be able to take off paper keeping away from those folks in HR, because HR right now is so bogged down in paperwork and finding documents for the large volume of hiring that we do in this district, that they're not able to provide support to our employees. And that's a very important part of HR. So in talking with Ms. McGee, we are able to look at using Title II funds and launch a mentorship program district-wide that is mentioned in that pamphlet as something that I would do in year one. We are already looking at contracting with Ms. Annette Bro, and we're going to contract with different folks, but she's just a really good one to start with because of what her PD focuses on, which is classroom management, to launch that in the 1920 school year as a proactive effort in retaining teachers.
Mr. Broussard?
You mentioned earlier the Tier 1 program that was implemented just this past. I think that's one of the problems that we're having, is that we buy whatever someone is selling. The program that was just introduced in July. Every time somebody comes in, they're selling a new program. We have had 4 different principals at Alice Boucher. Every year it's a different principal. I am hoping the principal we have now would stay there, and I'm hoping the Tier 1 program that we implemented would stay until it either successful or fail, not just buy into somebody else next year.
And I agree. And anyone who knows my work history and my belief system knows that I am one that likes to keep things consistent and basic, and I am not one that hops from one bandwagon to the next. And that's been a big part of the success in the schools that I've led, is that we stay true to what works. We give things an opportunity to work before we hop on the next bandwagon. Everybody has a solution. So we focus on basics, and we get really good at those things. I went into the acting role at Alice Boucher because of what you just spoke about, of the revolving door of principals that went out of that school. I wasn't willing to do that anymore. So that's when I volunteered to step into that role until we could find a leader that we had confidence in the skill set and in the commitment to Alice Boucher.
Thank you, Mr. Broussard. Mr. Knezik?
Ms. Trosclair, we've had the opportunity to have a fantastic superintendent, and this actually here is probably 20 or so pages of his accomplishments over his tenure here. What we're offering is an interim position,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
Could be up to a year, could be 6 months, maybe 7 months, 8 months, depending on how quickly the next board takes action. One of the concerns I think that the board expressed during the debate on whether or not to go with an interim or a permanent superintendent was the potential for a leadership vacuum. I think I'm going to misquote Dr. Chasson, but his kids can't afford a year. They can't afford to lose a year. They can't afford to lose a day or a month, right? So one of the things I think my question is, as an interim, do you intend to maintain the status quo of a great leader who's established a path, or and I'll use the words stabilize and solidify. Do you intend to stabilize and solidify what it is we have here, or do you have different intentions? Do you intend to lead, inspire, ensure accountability? In your own words, can you please express to
I
us
intend
what we
to lead
expect?
and inspire. I was actually going to show that in my presentation that would have taken 15 minutes, but I was told I had only 5. I've been very honored, very grateful to work with Dr. Aguilar. I told him that the other day, and I tell him that quite often, that I've learned a great deal working so closely with him. And we've made some really good strides in very key areas. Our graduation rate, schools coming out of comprehensive intervention label. We reviewed some trend data not long ago that shows in Lafayette Parish, in grades 3 through 12, in all 4 core subject areas, with the exception of 5th grade and 6th grade ELA and math, we closed achievement gaps between our white and our black students. That's tremendous in a district our size. Those things are celebrations, but when we look at the data, there's still tremendous room for growth. Our students with disabilities in this district, those are our special education students who are on track to receive a high school diploma. They're on the regular diploma track. Lafayette Parish scores in the bottom 17th percentile in this state. That means in the state of Louisiana, 83% of students are scoring better than our students. So that's an area of focus. Another area of focus is our 8th graders who are entering campuses behind. We have about 35% of our 8th graders, well, former 8th graders, 35% of freshmen right now sitting in high schools across this district that entered high school non-proficient in ELA and math. That's significant because students who fail Algebra 1 the first time they take it have a 70% greater chance of becoming a high school dropout. So can we afford to keep the status quo? Absolutely not. We have an obligation to review that data. Our students with disabilities, special education students, we have to do better, and we have to do better immediately. We need to look at 3rd grade reading levels. We need to look at 8th grade performance and build plans. Our academic team is already doing that. A lot of good things. Stability in our district is a great thing that I certainly want to follow Dr. Aguilar's example for. But as far as for data, if honored and fortunate enough to be chosen tonight as the interim superintendent, I'm going in on day 1 as if it's a 10-year contract, because kids can't afford for us to sit and twiddle our thumbs and wait for an official appointment.
Thank you, Mr. Knezik. I'll wrap it up with my question. It's going to be a little different. The audience is going to look at me funny for not asking what the gifted kids wanted me to ask, because I got a little bit different question for you. Should you be chosen as the interim superintendent, you're going to have 2 very different tasks at 2 very different schools in my district. At one end of Congress Street, you have Lafayette High, whose principal has announced he's leaving, and so I would imagine one of the first orders of business for the interim superintendent would be to select the instructional leader for that campus.
Absolutely.
At the other end of Congress Street, also in my district, is the school system's only F school. And so I would like to hear what your plans and your vision are for those 2 very different campuses and how you plan to differentiate the leadership needed at both locations.
In the same way that we differentiate for students, each campus and each leader has his or her own unique needs. Yes, choosing a principal for Lafayette High School is one of the first orders of business, absolutely. And we certainly put a lot of thought in choosing the right person for that role. Lafayette High School, is of course a school completely different than Lafayette Middle. But as I stated earlier, every campus has students who are vulnerable, and when you spoke about gifted, our gifted students are expected to grow every year as well. And when I look at teacher VAM data, not teacher evaluation data, not teacher scores based on observations and on raw score student data, when I look only at teachers' performance based on student growth, we have about 20% of our teachers across this district who score ineffective or emerging. So I will tell you that some of those teachers are teachers of gifted students. Sometimes students come to us at higher levels of achievement, and we don't always push as we should. We don't challenge. We don't present those students with those students with deeper critical thinking opportunities. So they continue to perform at high levels. They just don't grow to the next higher level. So that's a unique focus for Lafayette High School. Lafayette Middle is our district's only traditional school that still has an F rating, overall school performance score, which is tremendous for a district our size, but it's still not good for Lafayette Middle and the kids that school serves. So in looking at next moves for Lafayette Middle, nothing is off the table when we're looking at the needs of students. We are waiting to see what data that we should get in June shows us about our efforts this school year in transformation and the additional support that's been there. And then, we have to then evaluate what worked and what didn't and go to the next best plan for that school. But again, in the best interest of students, we need to look at any and all options to meet the needs of kids at Lafayette Middle School.
Thank you very much. Dr. Chasson has elected not to ask a question at this time, so you have another 5 minutes for whatever you'd like to close with.
Well, again, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. I have enjoyed my time here in Lafayette Parish and have been a part of many good things. I've learned a great deal. But I know that I'm the best candidate for this job for several reasons. One reason is my 35 years of successful educational experience and my record of turnaround success. I have been very effective in building teams that turn schools around and in teams that collaborate and move toward the same mission and goal. I put the students' needs at the center of any and all decisions. I had a former superintendent that I worked for in Acadia Parish, and I remember when I was going to become a first-time, new, fresh administrator, Mr. Bork told me at that time, he said, Ms. Trosclair, you're going to be faced with many tough decisions along the way. Decisions become so much easier when you ask yourself, what is in the best interest of a child or a student? And he was absolutely right. I have exhibited an unwavering commitment to student achievement, and I know that is something that won't change in me. I have a proven record of bringing stakeholders together, and if given the opportunity here in Lafayette Parish, I can commit to the fact that I will do the good and important work to the best of my ability as I have done for 35 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Trosclair. All right, we will now take another short 5-minute break, and then we will come back to tackle the next agenda item. All right, well, I'll go ahead and say something real quick while we stall for time for Mr. Hidalgo to return from wherever he went. Ms. Trosclair, Mr. Thibodeau, thank you very much for being here this evening, for the work you've done over your careers here in Lafayette and elsewhere in Louisiana. The passion both of you displayed for educating children is very evident by your answers tonight and your presentation and your work that you've done. And I'll say that we're fortunate to have two very qualified people apply for this job. Not only apply, but also be internal candidates who understand the community, understand the culture of Lafayette, understand the culture of the school system, and have displayed leadership capabilities that would make you effective in this job. We are exceptionally fortunate to have both of you educating children in this parish. You're both to be commended. Unfortunately, we have to select one. So, with that said, the next item on the agenda is selection of interim superintendent of schools. At this time, I would entertain a motion, if the board desires, to appoint an interim superintendent of schools for the 2019-2020 school year.
I move to nominate Irma Trosclair for our interim superintendent.
We have a motion by Dr. Chasson, seconded by Mr. Angel, that we nominate Irma Trosclair as the interim superintendent of schools for 2019-2020. Do we have any public comment on this motion? Do we have any board member comment? Mr. Hidalgo.
I want to echo your comments, Mr. President, before the vote, that had the pleasure of working closely on different issues with both of the candidates. While I still maintain that of Dr. Aguilar's entire staff, Mr. Joe Craig was the guy who would not sleep. Anything I've asked of these two candidates has been done with fidelity for the betterment of the school system. Excuse me, and it's very difficult to have to make this decision, and I think sometimes sitting on the other side of the table it doesn't seem difficult, but it's very difficult.
Dr. Chasson, I'd like to clarify your motion for the record of the minutes, that your motion is to select Irma Trosclair as interim superintendent of schools for 2019-2020. I believe we both said nominate.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Angel?
Yes, sir.
All right, the second still stands. Madam Secretary, please correct the minutes accordingly. Do we have any other board member comment? Madam Secretary, I'll call for the vote.
Nine for, none against.
Motion carries. Congratulations, Ms. Trosclair. We do have one last bit of housekeeping from Mr. Latchley.
I move that the board direct the president and vice president to discuss compensation with the interim superintendent and bring an item for approval at the board's May 8th meeting.
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Latchley that the board direct the president and vice president to discuss compensation with the interim superintendent and bring an item for approval at the board's May 8th meeting, seconded by Ms. Morrison. Do we have any public comment on this motion? Do we have any board member comment? Who said my name?
Right here.
Oh. we have any board member comment on this item? And because we did not give that motion to Ms. Dorothy in a timely manner, we may have to wait a couple of seconds. But when you're ready, Ms. Dorothy, please call the vote.
No. Oh, the speedometer goes over 200. I think it goes to 200. No, I've gone up. I've gone 1, maybe 120, but no, never gone. Yeah. Oh, it is. It's really stable. Like you hit 100, you feel like you're going 30 miles an hour. Super stable. Yeah.
Okay, items ready. Okay. Got it.
Motion carries. That being the last item on the agenda, this meeting is adjourned.